7 years ago, out of the blue, I got a phone call from a South Carolina radio host, and he had been watching VINwiki videos, which we were just a couple months into making content, so that was a huge shock to me that anybody of any note might have seen what we were doing, but he in particular was very fond of a story that I had told about buying a Lamborghini Gallardo from Kimmy, and especially about a way that I had used a joke to describe her anatomy that she could take a break while hula hooping. And so his ask was that I might come on his radio show, tell that story and a few more, and obviously I'm bartering. I said, well, would you mind then coming back down and telling some stories on the VINwiki channel? And so I did that. I'd recorded it remotely, and it was a blast. He was, obviously an amazing communicator. And of course, I'm talking about Robert Clifton Pitts. And a few weeks later, he returned the favor. He came back down to VINwiki, and at the time we were still filming in the big, cold, echoey warehouse, and he sat down in the chair, and he just wouldn't stop. Every story is the ones that have become so iconic, with how he became Rabbit, how he became the eBay outlaw, that honey poured over gravel voice, and everything that is Rob Rabbit Pitts. Over the years, he's told dozens and dozens of stories, and I think he's probably amassed, between the short form cuts, the long form videos, and the syndication to the other platforms, more than 200 million views out of the couple billion that we've had on VINwiki. So more than 10% of what VINwiki is Rob Pitts. And we became friends. I know he became great friends with Travis Bell and many of the other VINwiki storytellers over the years, and we shared not just the chance to come and swap stories, but real friendship, talking about car deals, talking about life, talking about love, talking about the things that were good, the things that were bad, and it was always great to hear his voice on the other end of the phone or just show up somewhere with him. And, you know, a couple things happened. Rob changed VINwiki, and VINwiki changed Rob, and both very much for the better. VINwiki changed because our storytelling grew up. I cannot tell you how many people have come through my door and sat in this chair and just said, I hope I could sound like Rabbit. And I hate to break it to them, but they can't and I can't. But every day we've gotten a little bit closer to the way that he builds the background, the way that he delivers the plot, the way that he ties the bow on at the end, and the way he reveals every humorous aspect. I mean, there were so many times where I'm sitting there, he's sitting here, and he would go through something and I'd say, hey, you could say it this way, and he'd love it. And there were so many times that I told a story that he saw later on YouTube, and he would call me and say, Ed, you should have said this. And I'm like, man, why are you not sitting on my shoulder the entire time? And so VINwiki is what it is because of who Rob is and the way that he could tell a story. Now, when I got to know Rob, what he really idolized, what he really looked up to were these guys like Richard Rawlings and Chip Foose and the characters of automotive television over the past couple of decades. And that was the dream. And what Rob did with the opportunity to have your attention and to be a steward of the audience's eyes was that he used that to become the very best version that he could define for himself. And about 3 years ago, Rob called me and he said, Ed, I'm about to go shoot a pilot for a Netflix show. I'm like, Rob, that's amazing. What is it? And he said, it wasn't called this, but ultimately it became Tex-Mex Motors. And it was one of these normal buy a car, fix a car, sell a car flips. They were buying cars out of Mexico, fixing them in El Paso, and then selling them around the country and into Texas in particular. And he was going out there to shoot, and he was kind of the car hunter, car buyer. It was a perfect character for Rob because it was who Rob really was. That hustler with the spiked up hair and just everything you'd ever want him to be. And the show ends up getting picked up. Rob gets an even larger role in it. It's extremely successful on Netflix. It's trending for months on end. Now, Netflix doesn't give you much in the way of analytics, but it was a very, very successful thing. So much so that they immediately signed everybody up for a second season. I didn't think much about it, but I shot Rob a text sometime in February and I said, hey, how's the show going? How's the shoot? You feeling good? And he said, you know what, bud, I'm not really doing that great. And I said, really? You want to talk? And immediately he called me and my world stopped. And I'm not sure how much it's really restarted since that call in February. And he told me that he struggled to sleep with a lot of stomach pain. He'd lost a lot of weight leading up to and during the show, and so finally the crew convinced him to stop just popping Tums, go into the ER where they did some x-rays, they did a CT scan, and ultimately they found a very large and something they classified as an inoperable tumor on his stomach, and they said it was stage 4 stomach cancer. So it hit me like a ton of bricks. I said, look, man, I'm not to disparage the oncology talent in the El Paso area, but why don't we try to get you a second opinion? But as soon as it wrapped, he headed back east, and in the year prior, he had developed a relationship with a lovely woman named Randy. She had joined us to the trip to the UK for petrol hedonism, and I'd gotten to know her, and she is a PhD, a proper doctor, and Rob loved to say that he had come out of a trailer park, gotten a TV show, and gotten engaged to a doctor, and ultimately is married a doctor. Rob has done a lot of amazing things in his life, but a lot of things that were not likely outcomes. And for that to happen, I was so happy for both of them. She got a good catch as well. So she actually helped get him into a university health system to get a proper diagnosis, and they concurred. They said it's not something that can be cut out. It's heavily vascularized. It's right at the intersection of his stomach, his esophagus. It's metastasized to his liver. They did more of an elaborate scan and found some evidence of it in his hip, in his whole lymph system, and they even saw some in his lung. Now, for a voice that was heavily brought to you by Marlboro Reds, he had great lungs throughout the whole thing, and he was very, very proud to remind us all of that. Now, they did some chemo, a couple different kinds, some immunotherapy, and the thought was never that this was going to be a cure, just going to give him some more time. And Travis and I spent a lot of time with Rob over the last few months, talking about life and about what he'd done, how proud we were of him, how appreciative we were of all the ways he's taught us, to mentored us, even when he didn't know that's what he was doing, and the impact that he's had on our lives, certainly for the better. And over those months, he had some good days. He had a lot of bad days. And we did everything that we could to be there with him as often as we could and to celebrate with him. Just a few weeks ago, we broadened the circle of people that knew about it a little bit and took a couple dozen people to South Carolina to have his 45th birthday celebration. It was an amazing night filled with everything Rob that you could possibly imagine, and in all the best and the right bad ways. And it was a great, great time. And I could tell he was hurting, but I could tell he was happy to be there, and it meant the world to us to be there. Now, shortly after that, some of the internal bleeding got tougher to control. And last week, started to have some swelling, and he went into the emergency room actually at a time when he was supposed to just go in to get a blood transfusion. Rob's needed a lot of extra blood over the last few months. And they immediately said, look, we're going to call in the doctor. We're not doing the transfusion. Something bigger is happening. And they did some x-rays, another CT, and they found a tear in his stomach. And it was something, because of the proximity of the tumor, because of the size of it, it wasn't something that could be surgically repaired in a way that he had any chance of surviving. And so the decision was made very much with Rob's involvement, and his consent was to move Rob into hospice on Thursday. I went there immediately, sat at his bedside for several hours, talked to him, talked to his mom. They'd finally gotten all his pain under control, which was a huge blessing for everybody. We prayed together. Rob and I have had a lot of spiritual conversations over the last few months, and we talked through the nature of salvation through Jesus, the sin that he would always say. He was very fond of saying, Rob, that I've done enough things in my life that it would make Ed Bolian defecate a hymn book, not in so many words. And, we talked about how Jesus was enough for that too. And he knew that, and I asked him if he believed it, and he said he did. And I'll tell you, he couldn't have put my mind or his mother's mind more at ease when he said, that almost makes the other side of this exciting. And it was for me too. So I stayed there for a while, and he was always surrounded by friends, by family, by the people that love him, the people that knew. Now, we had talked over the months about, do we want to do a big thing, bring the whole community in and not let this be the way that it gets revealed, but ultimately, he didn't want the condolences. He didn't want to change it. My proudest thing in the whole thing was that he was so happy with the stories that were out there, the persona that he had created, and how that was a true reflection of who Rob Rabbit Pitts was. And he was very happy with it to stay as it was. And over the weekend, surrounded by friends and family, Rob went to be with the Lord and lost that 6-month battle with stomach cancer. I don't know what follows that. I will say that tomorrow will be the first weekday in 7 years that there will not be a new VINwiki video. I hope that you'll spend the time watching his stuff, continuing to enjoy his videos, working on your own stories and thinking about what Rob meant to you and how he would tell your best automotive experiences, because he'd be better than any of us at it. There will be a funeral, some kind of service. The family's going to organize that, and you are invited. I'm going to put a link in the description of the video, and I hope that you'll come. I hope to see you there to continue to celebrate what Rob, what Rabbit, what they both meant to us in their own very special ways. But I know VINwiki will never be the same, and I also know that you meant the world to him. Every time I was with Rob and somebody would come up with him and tell him about their favorite story, their favorite thing he'd ever said, it would brighten his day, and it should, because he has impacted so many of you, and me, absolutely. So you meant the world to him, and he meant the world to me. And I'm glad I'll see him on the other side.